Welcome to Mining the Media, providing nuggets of news and cutting-edge questions and answers, minus the political blather. Here are your hosts, G.K. Allen and Dave Jeffers.
Welcome to part 2 of Bill Federer's interview on Mining the Media.
Madison says something to the effect that instead of seeing what meaning could be squeezed out of the words in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, instead go back, read the debates, and try to be faithful to the intentions of the people that wrote it. But then you had a change with evolution and Charles Darwin and Hegel, the German philosopher that came up with Hegelian dialectics, this gradual changing of things, and Darwin's gradual evolving of species concept. Well, there was a guy named Herbert Spencer, and he wanted to apply evolution to everything he could think of, including academia, including law. And so Christopher Columbus Langdell, in like the 1870s, 80s, 90s, was the head of Harvard and Harvard Law School. And they introduced evolutionary law. It's called case precedent theory. In other words, every other lawyer in the country and every other law school in the country would go back and read Blackstone. They would read the definitions of the words that were used when they passed the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Not so with Harvard. Christopher Columbus Langdell said, look, just take the most recent case and you can tweak it. You can broaden the definitions of the words and therefore expand and morph and evolve the meaning. And so one of the graduates of Harvard Law School is Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. And he is known as, the great dissenter, but because all the other justices would say, well, this is what it means. And he'd come up with some off the wall meaning. And Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr.'s biographer wrote that Holmes broke new intellectual trails, that instead of the law being something ukase or something that it comes down as an edict from God and the judges just need to figure out, how it goes back to the scriptures. He says that Holmes made the law into an ever evolving thing, changing with every new, economic and social condition. It's like, oh, okay, now it's just a bunch of mush that the justices can make into whatever they want. And so you basically have two types of justices. One, and there's lots of different terms for them, but generally wants to stick with the meaning of the founders. And the other could care less about the founders. They're just pushing a current agenda, and they can try to broaden the definition. So one way to change the Constitution, it's really involved. It's time intensive, labor intensive. You have to work hard to get elected congressmen and senators and presidents that hold your views. Then you have to pressure them to pass an amendment. And you need 2/3 of the Congress and Senate, and then it needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And this is very time intensive. You got to get the states involved. And then finally, the amendment is passed and the Constitution is changed. There's a whole lot easier way to change the Constitution. You just get one of these evolutionary activist judges to broaden the definition of the words in the existing Constitution, in the existing amendments and laws, and you just tweak it, right? So, the one that's clear is the word religion, where it says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So originally, religion meant Judeo-Christian, and then they put in, other religions that believed in God. Well, after 1947, we had the federal Supreme Court saying that ethical culture was a religion and secularism is a religion. Even with a federal case in 2005, it said atheism is a religion. And so now to not prefer one religion over the other, they kick God out.
And now they've got an atheist running Harvard as a chaplain.
Yeah. And so here's Jefferson, who in his letter to the Danbury Baptist talked about how that the state should not encroach on churches And so he's used the phrase because there's a wall of separation between church and state. His understanding was the wall was to keep the government out of persecuting people in the church, which is what was happening in Virginia pre-revolution, where the Anglicans were chasing out the Baptists and the Puritans and Quakers and so forth, and referring to England, where it had the established Anglican denomination and they were persecuting people of other faiths. But it was this idea that the wall of separation was to keep the government from interfering with church business. And then Jefferson believed in the Creator. He mentions the Creator in the Declaration of Independence. All men are endowed by their Creator. Chiseled on the wall of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., are 5 quotes from Thomas Jefferson. 4 of those quotes mention the Creator. He says, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and his justice cannot sleep forever. And so here's Jefferson, who believes in a Creator, and yet you have federal judges to preserve the separation of church and state, forbid schools from teaching intelligent design, because intelligent design means there's a Creator, and we can't teach there's a Creator because we got to keep separation of church and state, which is the phrase taken from Jefferson's letter to the Danbury. So in other words, these activist justices are so brilliant, they can take Jefferson's words to outlaw what Jefferson believed.
The part about that, Bill, and you, as always, brilliantly explained how we evolved to where we are right now, is that the legislature has bought it wholesale. Once in a while, you'll hear a senator like Cruz, or I'm thinking of the one from Utah, can't think of, he clerked also.
Lee?
Who? Yeah, Mike Lee, he clerked for the Supreme Court. They understand the limits of the judiciary, but we really don't do anything. I mean, I remember when Newt Gingrich was running for office in 2012, he thought, you know what? We're going to start limiting the judiciary. We won't even let them review our laws if we don't want them to, if we think they're going to be activists about it.
Yeah, there were some cases, for example, Truman. There was a law that had to deal with minimum wage and paying workers, I guess something to do with wanting to be paid for commute time. Mm-hmm. And the businesses didn't want to have to be liable for this. Long and short of it, Truman, even though the law was passed, didn't nullify the law, but he signed something that said that the states could not be held in violation of the law and would not be prosecuted for violating the law if they, violated the law for this particular reason or whatever. I remember when Mike Huckabee was running for president, he was asked about what he would do regarding these decisions, abortion and the gay marriage and so forth. He said, I would simply send a letter to the states saying that in other words, he couldn't invalidate the law, but it's the president's job to have the Department of Justice under the executive branch enforcing the law. Right. And so he said, I would send a letter to these states saying the Department of Justice under my administration will not enforce these pro-abortion laws or these pro-homosexual laws. So your state is free to do whatever you want without any fear of my administration breathing down your neck. But, back to the original discussion of the Constitution and its biblical premise that man is a sinful, fallen creature. You contrast this to France, and they had their Rousseau, and the concept was that, man is born in a perfect state, but it's society that corrupts him. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm correct, I think Rousseau had his son grow up like in the woods behind his estate, thinking, well, if he's not touched by man, he'll be a pure guy. He ends up being this totally unruly caveman type of thing. I mean, it's like it totally backfires. But nevertheless, in France, they did not have checks and balances, thinking that man is deep down is a good, being, and they'll do what's right. Well, it turns into a bloodbath.
Hmm.
their directory and their, you know, chopping off 30,000 heads in Paris with the guillotine, and then Napoleon firing cannons down the street with grape shot to just flat out kill all these people that were protesting the injustices of this new. And then there's a group in the Vendée, a northwest rural area, that didn't want to go along with this new French secular government. Well, this French secular government sends the army out to the Vendée and kill 300,000 men, women, and children. It's considered the first modern genocide. But it's okay because it's going to help establish this new, beautiful government of liberty, equality, fraternity. And it's like, and it's interesting, their motto: liberty is experienced individually. Fraternity was their word for socialism. The fraternity, the group, the collective, the social contract, right? The fraternity. And equality can be understood two ways. In America, it was equal treatment before the law. In France, it was everyone having an equal amount of stuff. And if the fraternity, the group, the collective, the mob thinks you have too much stuff, your individual liberties are thrown out the window. They're invalidated by the will of the group, the state. And so they were mutually exclusive terms. So liberty and fraternity, they're like oil and water. They don't mix, right? The fraternity always supersedes and invalidates the individual's personal liberties and freedoms. And so it turns into this collective, this state, which did this modern genocide of chopping off, heads and killing the people in the Vendée.
Well, I've got a question for you on this subject of the Constitution and things related. Last week or so in the news, the National Archives seemed to go a little wokey cancel culture in terms of our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, and things related. And that really concerns me because it seems like newspeak, Orwellian language, is coming into the National Archives and our ability to understand history.
Yeah, I went to the website and it had the U.S. Constitution. And underneath the address bar on the website, it said warning or caution, some words in this document may be offensive. It's like, hello, this is the Constitution, and now you're saying it could be offensive, probably because it says man or mankind or something. I don't know.
That's frightening. That mindset is frightening.
Well, I've been to the National Archives, and as you guys know, I'm a Gold Star dad, and looking at the documents, the real documents, is so overwhelming and so moving. I just sat there and silently wept, and not so much because of my son, that was part of it, but just having served in the military and studied this and have such a passion for it. When you see it, it just overwhelms you. I mean, the greatness of those two documents, and that just disturbs me. I had not heard that. That just disturbs me to no end that they would do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the two documents, the Declaration is the mission statement, so to speak. Right. And then the Constitution is sort of like the bylaws of how to carry out the mission statement. So every company, you have a purpose for the company being in existence. Is it to deliver tomatoes or, provide airplane rides or whatever? There's the purpose. And then the bylaws is the corporate structure of how they're going to carry out the mission statement. And so it's the Declaration that mentions the creator, that mentions we have rights from a creator, and they're inalienable. Now, what does inalienable mean? That means the rights cannot be taken away nor given away. Mm-hmm. These rights are yours forever. They belong to the individual. That, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And so you look at the other countries and their rights granted by the government.
Right.
We have somebody that moved to New Zealand, and all of a sudden, New Zealand, decided to disarm everybody and decided to do this, that, and the other. And it's like they came out from underneath England, and in England, it was the king and the parliament, would make the laws, and everybody just had to obey them. They didn't have a First Amendment. They didn't have this concept underlying. I mean, maybe if you dig far enough back, but as far as the present day structure, that the people don't have a First Amendment in the New Zealand founding documents, that they have rights from a creator, and the government's job is to protect those creator given rights. I love the quote from Eisenhower. He said, "In some lands, the state claims to be the author of civil rights. If the state gives rights, it can and inevitably will take away those rights." He said our founding fathers had to refer to the creator in order to make the revolutionary experiment make sense. In other words, we had to go above the government's head,
Right.
and say we have rights from the creator. The government's job is to protect our creator given rights. If there is no creator, where do the rights come from? The government, the social contract, the group. What if the majority of the mob in this social contract decide that it's best for their health that you have to surrender all of your individual liberties, even to your own body? So that's the dilemma. And when we go back to the founders, it was increased. Your rights come from God. You're nice to your neighbor because you're accountable to God, and the government's job is to protect your creator given rights. But it's a liberty with a corresponding responsibility.
Right.
And so every parent faces this, right? So you want to get your kid to become independent, but also responsible. And the more responsible they are, the more independence they're given, right? It's like the parent gives the teenager the car keys and says, "You're a good kid. You have internal morals. You're going to do what's right. Here are the keys. Come home whenever you think it's right." But if that kid drinks and drives and parties and he's driving like a maniac, he's going to be pulled over by the police. He's going to have the keys taken away, his car impounded, and he's going to be put in jail behind bars. So this is the idea is that, look, teenager, you are going to be controlled, either voluntarily from the inside or forcibly from the outside. It's the same way with the country. We're either going to be voluntarily controlled with internal morals, or we're going to teach our kids there is no right, there is no wrong. You don't even know if you're a boy or a girl anymore. It's total borderlessness, total lawlessness, total chaos. And these kids are shoved out of the street. They have no concept of right or wrong, no moral compass. And they decide they want to steal something, they just steal it. I was reading where Lowe's in, I don't know, maybe Portland or one of these states, that people just go in with shopping carts, fill up the shopping carts, and just flat out go out of the store.
CVS is having a problem with that in San Francisco.
Hey, well, we better recognize the clock, Bill, because we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I know you have another interview to go with. So, GK, you want to wrap up with one last thing with him, and then I'll
close. Yeah, real quick, since we're looking at the clock, in 10,000 words or less, how important was Ben Franklin as it relates to the Constitution? We often hear about the Declaration of Independence with him, but as it relates to the Constitution, was he a significant pen?
Yeah, I think he was. And by the way, all of my books are on my website, AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. And so Ben Franklin was on the Committee of Four with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams to write the Declaration of Independence. And Ben Franklin was over in France that did the Treaty of Paris in 1787, I think, to end. I'm sorry, 1783, to end the Revolutionary War. And then Ben Franklin was the oldest person at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and he hosted it. So he was the governor of Philadelphia, and the Constitutional Convention was taking place in Philadelphia. And one of the things I like to point out is They were bickering over how the large states and small states should be represented in the new government. Large states wanted to be based on population, and Virginia and New York had the largest population. They would basically decide what's going to happen. And the small states wanted every state represented equally. And it was a deadlock. And Ben Franklin gives a speech, and it's recorded in Madison's records of the convention. And then he called for prayer. And he says that during the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this assembly for divine guidance. And have we forgotten such a powerful friend, or do we assume we no longer need his help? He says, I propose that every day before we start the business that we open prayer. I'm paraphrasing. And then they adjourn. They don't vote on it right then, but they adjourn. And all the delegates go to church for 3 days, and they let the preachers preach to them. Then they get back together, and they do the Connecticut Compromise, where every state is represented equally in the Senate, but based on population in the House, with one congressman for every 30,000 people. And it passes. Now, when they passed the Constitution, they went ahead and had passed for a chaplain to be paid for by each house. So there was a Senate chaplain and a House chaplain. And originally they were Episcopal, and the Episcopal denomination branched off of the Anglican, just didn't have the king there. But then it had Presbyterians and a couple Baptists and Methodists and a couple Catholics and so forth. But every session of the U.S. Congress has been opened with prayer by a Christian minister. And but that was Ben Franklin that had originally made that suggestion. Ben Franklin then became the president of the first anti-slavery society in America in 1790. And he spent the rest of his life fighting slavery. And he even in 1790 delivered a petition to the U.S. Congress calling for an end of slavery. But by that time, you had Eli Whitney had invented the cotton gin, and the southern states, particularly Georgia and South Carolina, were making a lot of money off that, and they were nixing it. And then every state, if you see after that point, states would come into the Union in groups of two. Right. And it would usually be a free state and a slave state, and some of the states would even split. So in 1820, Missouri comes into the Union as a slave state, and they needed a free state to counter it, so they split Massachusetts in half. They called the top half Maine. And so now Maine came into the Union as its own state in 1820 as a free state to balance Missouri as the slave state. And then when the Louisiana Purchase and the Mexican Secession and the Gadsden Purchase, you had new territories coming into the Union. And the question is, are they going to be free or slave? And the slave states began to send colonizers out there like Kansas to hurry up and get it to come in as a slave state so they could keep their numbers up in the Congress. And of course, the free states countered that, but it's called Bleeding Kansas. But anyway, Ben Franklin was definitely a significant voice at the Constitutional Convention.
You know what's amazing, too, with Franklin and Jefferson? They were geniuses. It's a word we misuse and overuse. When you think of the invention, especially with Franklin, the Franklin stove is still used. We had geniuses among our founding fathers, and today we have midgets.
Yeah. Well, on that point, I think we better close this, Bill, because I know you have about 15 minutes till your next interview, so I want to make sure we give you some time to prep for that.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
So wonderful to have you on. Hey, everybody, visit his website, AmericanMinute.com. I've already told you this. Sign up for his daily newsletter. I love it. I learn every day something new. You'll not be sad. And then, especially for your homeschooling families, he has so much great information. You'll learn everything and then a bunch more from what he's already showed us. So thanks for showing up on our show, Bill. We'll get you next time. And everybody, thank you for listening and watching this. And please share this with everybody And until then, we'll see you next time. Visit our website, mindingthemedia.com. We are done.